Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Jojy. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. So this week, I was telling Joji that a couple of instances lately, I have been stepping outside of my comfort zone and kind of taking more risks, which is something that, if you know me, is not very common. I typically, really think through everything that I do. I don't do things on a whim, but I was trying something new, and so she did some research on comfort zone and got some information, and so we thought this would be a topic that might resonate with some people, especially, like I said, if you're like me, that you kind of keep into the space, stay in the parameters of what you have in front of you and don't kind of merge outside of that. So, Joji, I know that you did a bit of research on this. So I don't want to kind of go too far off the discussion, and want to kind of hear what you had to what you found in your research.
Okay. Well, this research is different than what I've done before. So I've become a user of ChatGPT. And so some people are like, oh my gosh. And some people are like, yeah, I use it all the time. So to our listeners, forgive me as I don't have anything to reference, but this is, I just asked ChatGPT, tell me everything you know about comfort zone. And I really learned a lot. And so, first of all, from both of us having a psychology background, I found that the term or the phrase comfort zone actually comes from behavioral psychology, and it's related directly to the research that's been done on stress. And what I was also amazed about was that they talk about the different levels of stress in terms of being too little, moderate, or too much stress. And surprisingly to me, comfort zone is actually closer to the low end of the spectrum for stress, which as we talk about it more, we will understand why that is. Because, by definition, comfort zone is familiar routines, something that you're doing sort of on autopilot, so minimal anxiety, and it's stable, but it has limited growth opportunity, right? So all of that basically talks about, the conversation that you and I are going to have. And my recent personal experience with comfort zone, it comes along with exercise. And I was listening to something and they were talking about, you don't have to do, I think the old concept of working out for muscle training and for women in my age group, doing weight resistance training is really important for bone health and everything else. And every beginning of the year, I try to think about, okay, I need to do this because, it really has so much applicability when it comes to mobility and strength as you get older and all those other kinds of things. But the new thing I heard this year was that it's not about doing like, you know, all these reps and, all these, what do they call groups of reps? Like, you don't have to do each activity 20 times and do them, you know, 10 times each, which is what I had in my head. And so really what they talk about is you really have to do the exercise, the weight bearing exercise until you hit you are on the edge of your comfort zone. And so you're starting to push through that comfort zone, but you don't have to do 10 more. You really only have to do one or two more because what you're trying to do is to extend that weight to a place where you haven't gone before. Because if you stay in your comfort zone, you're really not extending that growth. And so that's the most recent exposure that I've had to this idea of comfort zone. And it's really not the true definition of it, but it made sense to me. And when you brought this up as a topic, I thought, oh yeah, it is really just stretching it a little bit. Like you don't have to go all the way, into like a high stress category. We're just so used to and comfortable in a certain behavior that that's what's limiting. So that's what I have to start off with.
Well, and I think that how you described it with the weight training is like such a good kind of um, description, because I think that that's what happens a lot of times. I think that we kind of go through our day-to-day activities and things and say like, "Oh, I can't do that." And I think that this came out of um a discussion I was having, and it goes back to self-care and the idea of what are some things that I want to try, that I want to do to just kind of have me time. And what came out of that was like I'd have to try some new things that I haven't ventured into. And I was like, "Oh, I can't do that." Like that's not something I can do. And again, it goes back to that, you're in this space where you feel comfortable and going outside of that. I mean, I was listening to you and you were saying like it's a low stress thing. I think going through the motions is low stress, but then transitioning into going outside of that for me specifically creates a lot of stress or anxiety because now I have to take steps that feel very, not grounded. They feel very scary in some ways. And it's like, oh, I have to put myself out there. I have to do something that is not common. And I think that that can create more stress in that circumstance. But otherwise, you do become stagnant. You do not grow. And I think that that's where it lies.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like that's exactly the point is that it is that comfort and that we know what to expect. And so it's very routine. And that creates definitely a sense of safety and comfort in we know how much time it's going to take, we know how much energy it's going to take. And so as a result, it's very predictable and that there's a lot of comfort in that. But to your point, I mean, when you try something different, there is a certain amount of stress because it's unknown. And as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, like I am now a person who exercises and does like, and when I say yeah, exercise, I mean like yoga or doing stretching or doing, a little bit of weight in the morning. And for the most of my life, I was not that person. And I remember trying to grow into a morning practice. I just thought this is never going to work because I'm not a morning person. I don't like getting out of bed. I can't be late for work because usually I get there early. And so there were all these things that I kept like putting up barriers to doing something that was more convenient for me at that time in my life. So being a working mom, working out after work just meant that I rushed through working out, then I rushed home, and then I was throwing something on the dinner table. And then, I didn't really get a good workout. I left in a hurry and it was all like just getting through the day, but I didn't really experience any of it. And I doubt that any of my workout was valuable because I was stressed out getting there. I was stressed out while I was there and I was stressed out trying to get home so I could get dinner on the table. And so I just thought to myself at one point, like it'd be so much easier if I just woke up and exercised. And I thought, how is that even going to work? Because I'm not a morning person. And so I really had to give it a try and get up earlier. And now that's the only way that I would work out. Like I don't ever think that working out in the evening is something I even like to do. I can't even imagine how I did it before. And so I think that the little bit of stress we're talking about that comes with changing a pattern that's old and familiar is the right amount of stress for growth. I mean, nowhere are we trying to tell the listeners that, you should push yourself and do something extraordinary. That's not what we are talking about. We're talking about incremental challenge so that you're continuing to grow compared to staying in a very known routine so that there is nothing happening that is changing the way you think or the way you behave or the way that, whatever it is that the activity surrounds. And when we talk about this, we also have to look at, why do people do this? And of course, this is rooted in our physiology. So as the research was continuing, or as I was doing the research, the article talked about the fact that, as humans, we love patterns and we cling to those patterns. And so our brain, it's wired into us for survival and all these other things that we've talked a little bit about before. So, the brain and the body is an efficient, vehicle. And so efficiency is predictability. Also, you have to be ready for a threat and any kind of conflict. And so that's that, fight or flight. So your body is, stays in a very like a homeostatic kind of state because you have to be ready to pounce when you need to do that. And so there's also about who we are. And Alyssa, you said this. Anybody who knows me knows that, making change can be difficult, or trying something new or stretching myself. And so who we are as people is also tied up with the behaviors that we do. And so there is also that resistance to, who am I? What am I? And if I do this, does that mean I'm not being this way? There's also that topic of imposter syndrome that we talked about, months ago in a podcast. And so there's also, who we are and how we define ourselves and trying to stay true to that. And there's also just the avoidance of, taking a risk that might end up, making us lose something that we value. And so these are all things that reinforce that behavior that keeps us doing the same thing. And there's a lot of protective things in that. We just have to sort of case by case figure out, what is no longer working for us and what is giving us the opportunity to stretch ourselves a little bit in the right direction. So that's what the research says in to that point.
Yeah, and I think that the what you were describing, like the barriers, I that was what I latched onto. So kind of a little bit backing up for a moment, is I think that we create those barriers out of fear, out of anxiety, out of a lot of things that you were talking about, and when we do, we're shortchanging ourselves in some way or not allowing ourselves for that growth. And I think that that's something to really evaluate and look at. Am I staying in this circumstance because it's easier or because it's safe versus do I have a space to grow? Do I have an opportunity here that might allow for, unexpected things? Like I can remember so many instances where, and I'm sure our listeners can too, like those times where you went outside of your comfort zone. And I remember like going out for lunch with one of my daughter's friend's mother and just putting myself out there, going up to her saying like, hey, would you like to grab lunch sometime? And ended up we hit it off very well, and she's one of my closest friends, and it was one of those things where making friends, we've talked about, we have our book club and all of these things in our lives that we tend to think, sometimes we think worst case scenario, but really worst case scenario is that, if it doesn't work out, you go back to the drawing board and you reassess and you figure it out. But I think that not taking those leaps and bounds at time can really keep you in a space that maybe you have grown out of. And I think that that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and it's an epidemic where people will say, and I don't know how often you hear this, Alyssa, but I hear it a lot, is when people say, I'm bored, right? And I think that if we thought that boredom was signaling something to us that it's an opportunity for change, then I think we might actually spend a little bit more time thinking about why are we bored? And I think when we're bored, we're restless, and sometimes it can get you into bad behavior, and sometimes it can actually encourage you to try something different, and useful for us. And I think that in the last 20 years, I think boredom has become something, or like a restlessness. When I feel that way, typically I start thinking like, why? Like why? Or if I'm taking something for granted, it's like I don't experience as much fun or pleasure as in some activity that I used to. Then I think to myself, well, what is causing that, angst? Or is there something else that I should be doing? And I think that what kinds of signs, and maybe this is a good question for you, Alyssa, what signs do you see when you are sort of feeling that way? Do you have any signs that make you think about like, why am I feeling this way? Or, oh, I'm feeling this way again. Are there things like that that happen to you?
I think for me, I mean, I think that, so we're talking about getting out of your comfort zone, but I do try to really challenge myself. And I think that I'm so busy and do so many different things. Um, and so I actually have like the opposite where it's not boredom or restlessness. It's like I'm overstimulated and I need to really hone in on like what do I need to be doing, and not doing all the things, but like breaking it down. And a lot of times people say like, what can you take off your plate? And I'm like, I don't know. Um and so, I look at, for me, what is something that maybe needs to go away, and I need to focus my energy on this particular thing that really brings me joy, or what is something that I haven't been engaging in, and that maybe, I I I'm not feeling joy right now. What do I need to add in? So it sounds contradictory because I'm it's a addition and subtraction daily task for me of, looking at our calendar and being like, okay, this is something I'm just not going to do, and this is something I want to do. And kind of making that balance so that I, at the end of the day, go to sleep being like, you know what, I did something for me. I actually just added this app that helps me, and I have like a checklist of things that I have to get done for the day. And one of the things on that list is like, take 15 minutes for yourself to just do something that makes you happy. And so that has also gotten me thinking of like, what does that look like? What do I want to engage in for 15 minutes or more if I have the time that brings me joy, and what do I need to take off my plate? So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's, I think for me, it's very rare or seldom that I'm bored or restless because I pack myself so much in. I mean, I think being a working mom with 4 kids, just inherent to my circumstances currently. But I think that for me, it's like, okay, what am I putting my energy into that maybe I don't need to, because it's not giving me back what I need?
Yeah, and what you said just made me think about in my 20s and 30s, I loved, like, I'm putting, being busy in quotation marks, like in air quotes, because I loved being busy, but that's because I also didn't like silence. And so I came from a really loud family. I have 2 brothers, and there was always some ruckus going on, and I was very used to that. And I remember, when I met my husband in my early 30s, um I think that's right. Maybe late 30s. I can't even remember. But like he came from a very quiet background. And so you'd be hard pressed to find me sitting in quiet. Like, if I was driving, I was listening to loud music. I was always surrounded by music. Like I had a radio in my shower, and from like morning to end, I was listening to music. And and it was really and he would say to me, early on in our relationship, like, you don't really like quiet. And I am like, well, I do like quiet. And he's like, well, you're never around quiet. And so then I started trying, and I realized how uncomfortable it was. And that's what your story reminds me of, because even your comfort zone is being really busy and active, and it's your lifestyle, because you do have, 4 children, but at the same time, like carving out time for yourself, or having some time that you dictate what happens very intentionally for your time, is also a challenge for you. And so I do see like my early on love for like surrounded by noise, similar to you being very active because that's the way your life lends itself. But finding those activities that actually bring you joy and you are in control of, not that your day just is in control of you, is also is also getting out of your comfort zone into something that is what how you want to spend your time, whether it's 15 minutes or 5 hours. You're dictating what you want to do. And it is something that you have to practice, right? Because it's so outside of your normal experience. So it does make sense to me in my own way of thinking about it. So yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I totally do.
Yeah, and I was kinda laughing over here because I was like, "Oh, yeah," like, I have a couple days a week where I drive to work alone, like, there's no kids in the car because I drop them off, um, and I always fill that space, and I have tried to just, like, not have the radio on, not have an audiobook on, like, just be quiet, and that feels very uncomfortable to me, but I think that sometimes, that noise and thing is something that we have to kind of quiet and let ourselves reflect. So I was like, yeah, thank you for describing exactly where I'm at. I think the other thing that I hear a lot from my friends is, they specify like mom guilt, and I don't have that as much. I mean, I'm sure I have it in like some form, but I mean, they're like, oh well, if I get out of my comfort zone, if I go do like this activity or you know a book club or whatever it is, like, oh, I feel like I should be home or I should be, you know, taking care of my kids 'cause I've been working all day or whatever it is. And I think that like that's something that's another barrier for some people. So I don't personally experience that, but I understand it. I understand why people feel guilty for engaging in the things that make them that kind of get them out of that comfort zone. And I think that it's hard. I think that it's hard to do that because of the guilt. And I think mom guilt is one example, but I think that a lot of people might feel guilt in a lot of different ways and say, oh, I can't do that. I think I'm just trying to think of like all the different ways that this applies. Because I really think this applies to all different facets of your life. So, if I'm talking about, doing new activities, I think it can apply to, applying to a new job. It can apply to being in a new relationship. I mean, it really can span the whole lifespan. Making new friends. We talked about pruning friends. All of these things are ways that we really ultimately try to get to a state of happiness and joy and something that, we're all essentially trying to achieve. But I think that we do it in different ways. And I think for me right now, where I am in this space, I'm looking at all the different facets of my life and saying, what does that look like? How do I want this to look for me now in my early 40s so that, 10 years from now, it might look very different. Like, that's what I want to focus on.
One of the things that you made me think about was, what are the myths or what are things that people like, what keeps us sort of stuck in our comfort zone? And so I was looking for that in this article, and there, as I was reviewing them, it really made me think about how we do cling to that. So I think the first thing is that I think I know I talked about it, which is that people assume that change has to be like 180 degrees from where you are today. And that's not true. Growth is incremental. None of us are going to sustain growth if you think you're going to go from A to Z. You really have to do it little by little. And so we're talking about small changes, not huge, life altering changes. The second thing is that people feel that the fear we feel with change means that it could be dangerous. Fear is not always just about danger. It is also something that says, okay, this is a significant change. This is significant. So fear sometimes represents more significance, not that it's like stop. You should stop. Fear makes you stop, yes, in life and death situations, but not in everyday normal situations. The third thing they talked about is that we believe that, being comfortable means healthy. And that is not the case in all situations. And so, if your patterns or your comfort zones are built around avoidance of something new, then it's really unhealthy. So in that situation, you do have to try to move forward and not stay stuck. And the last thing that they talk about is that, confidence is associated with people who are willing to try something new. I don't know how many confident people that we know and identify as confident who do the same behaviors over and over again and are not willing to challenge themselves or take a little bit of risk in trying something new. And I think that's something that most of us want to be perceived as a confident individual, right? I mean, whether that's in our relationships, in our careers, and just in the way that we are perceived in social situations or such. We want to be known as confident, but that also, I understand in this context how that is tied to you can't do the same old thing, not change a pattern, and think that there's confidence associated with it. This is like I'm going to share a really dumb example. Like there are people that I see walking around society that still have the haircut that was popular when I was in high school. And I think to people, like, it has been so long. It's been like 30 years. And I think to myself, why are you still having that haircut? Like, we've had so much happen in our lives. And it's such a dumb example, but it's like hair is so easy to grow. I know some people, have my hair grows quickly, maybe, and other people's don't, or I have thicker hair, and some people may have fine hair. But really, what is the excuse for having the same haircut for 30 years? I mean, I just don't get it. I really don't understand it. So that's like a silly example, but it's something that when I see that person, they don't shout confidence to me. They don't shout like, oh, this is a person who's contemporary, who knows what's going on. Like if I'm going to ask this person, what is happening or what's important to them, there's this perception that they're stuck in an age that is not today. And I don't know if you were to reflect that back to that person, like, is that what you want people to think of you? Because that's what first struck me is just your hair.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think it's actually not like a silly description or an example because I think that that's even like a very small example of how people go outside their comfort zone. Like when they go to, the hair salon and they decide like I'm gonna go short. Or I actually thought when we first started, because we have had that discussion about going gray, and with Sue and had like this excellent discussion about that. I thought that's what you were going to say when you were saying like going outside your comfort zone. But I think that there's so many small ways that we can also, take kind of this moment to say, hey, I'm going to try something new. And you know what? Again, like, hair grows back and you can change the color and stuff like that. It's not permanent. But it definitely can be, very challenging to even do those small things, to even, change your clothing, the way that you dress and the way that you present yourself. I think that there's so many ways in which we kind of stay stuck sometimes. And I think that it's really good for us to assess that. And so kind of looking at like, where am I kind of being stagnant and where can I take some steps to maybe, I don't know, grow or just expand my horizons? Because I really think that a lot of times we are our own enemies in that particular area.
And give a little bit of a hair update. I have to share that about a week ago yesterday, I am going gray for the listeners who have been sort of part of my journey here. So I am a month and a half into not coloring my hair. My gray is about maybe an inch and a half. And last week, as part of this very planned activity, I cut probably 8 inches of my hair off last week. And so I haven't had this short hair in several years, maybe 5. And so but it looks very similar. So it's deceiving in the sense that, I've got this outgrowth and then I have this shorter haircut, but the style is exactly the same. It's just shorter. But the number of people who are like, wow, I really like your hair short. I didn't realize, a lot of people who said, wow, everything looks good on you. Or, because I mean, 8 inches of hair is a lot of hair to be gone. And so, of course, drying my hair and shampooing my hair has been a very different experience. And but it's interesting because I know that some people are just being polite and I appreciate that and the kindness around that. I totally get it. But I also think that there are some people that I think genuinely are like, wow, you look good in short hair. Like it's really flattering. It brings the people's eyes up to your face a little bit more. And it's just enough of a change that it draws attention to something as different. And I think that's the part of getting out of our comfort zone that we don't, we're afraid and that stops us is that people are actually going to encourage you to continue doing it. And even with my gray, one of the things that I realized is that I don't have like dirty gray hair. I've got like beautiful white gray hair, and I really like it. There's a part of it that I like because I think of my cousin Clara every time I see it and because of who I am. that gives me joy. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I always said, like, if I knew that I had pretty gray hair, like I would grow it out. But now I'm realizing that I do have pretty gray hair or pretty white hair. And then my whole head is not gray or white. But I don't know. I might actually get that like white streak that people were talking about. So I mean, it's interesting because you learn something about yourself. My stylist said, that color really brightens up your face. And I didn't know what that meant. Like, I'm like, how could gray hair brighten up my face? But I think it's because I have a darker skin tone and I have dark hair. So this just breaks up that pattern a little bit, maybe. And so it's been really sort of a fun experience. I didn't think it was going to be this way. But if anything, it has taught me that you just sort of got to give it a try. And I'm glad that I found a way to do that in my late 50s instead of coloring my hair for another 10 years and then not and missing the opportunity to see that today. So it's been interesting. I'll say that. I didn't think that I would be this joyful about it. But I think it's my mindset. A lot of it is my mindset. And I think that tying it to something I care about, which is my cousin, has helped me along the way. But I don't know if I would say that I would have thought I would say it's been fun. It's been interesting. I don't regret it at all.
Yeah, I love that for you. And I'm like, oh, we have to see each other in person so I can see it. I'm like excited to see the evolution of it. And I know that we're coming up almost on time here. I think that you brought up one last point that I wanted to just kind of make note of is that I think another barrier that we have is others' expectations of us, other people's perceptions. What are other people going to say? How is that going to be received? And I think that that's something that we also have to work through. And I think at the end of the day, there's been a lot of times where my husband and I have worried about what are other people going to say. And then at the end of the day, we've said, you know what, this is our life. This is our family. With us having 4 kids, sometimes people said like, why are you doing that? It's like, you know what, this is our decision. This is only between us. And it doesn't include other people. Other people will just have to adjust. And so I think that there's also that barrier that we have to push through. And I think that this has been, surprisingly, really uplifting conversation for me. And I hope for, again, our listeners as well, because it's one of those things, I think it's a good timing too. We're kind of starting a new year and people are thinking about things. And we're kind of getting past that like New Year's resolution phase. But I think that, little changes, whether they're, hair coloring or, you know, big changes along the way, I think that there's so much out there that people can think about and, like I said, assess, identify like what's going to bring you joy, because that's always on my mind, and then really going from there. So, Joji, I'll let you close us out, and if you had any final thoughts, and then we'll hopefully hear from our listeners as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just want to say, this has been, I agree with you 100%. It's been an uplifting conversation. I'm actually sitting here smiling, thinking about everything we talked about it. And I really appreciate you bringing this topic up. And I hope that our listeners have found also some things to encourage them in the conversation, or at least give them a pause and have them think about something that we talked about. Please reach out to us if you'd like to share your comments, or as we said, we invite you to join us because we think that makes it a lot more interesting when our listeners participate in the conversation. You know how to get a hold of us, either through the Facebook page. You can email us. Those of us who us personally can reach out to us in our contact information. So please reach out, and thank you again for taking the time to listen to Elisa Marie and my thoughts on this topic. Until next time. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.